Hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Overcoming Your Less Than Perfect Board. My name is Jenny Taylor and I'm the Marketing Specialist here at GuideStar. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First, we're going to be live tweeting during today's presentation using the hashtag NPOBoardTips, so please join the conversation on Twitter. Secondly, we are happy to take questions from all of you during the presentation. While the Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation, you're more than welcome to submit questions at any time. To submit a question, you can use the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If we can't get to all of your questions before our time is up, we'll post more of the answers on the GuideStar blog at trust.guidestar.org soon. And finally, we will send all of you an email with a link to the presentation and today's recording in a few days. I'm now happy to introduce Steve Orr and Kelly Dunphy. Steve is the managing partner and co-founder of Orr Associates Incorporated, as well as the founder and executive director of Youth Inc. Prior to founding the company, Steve was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Kelly is the vice president of fundraising and development for OAI. She has more than 13 years of professional and volunteer fundraising experience. Kelly has also partnered with several large nonprofits in New York City and Washington, D.C. as they developed and recruited new board members. Now that you've met our presenters, Emma and Steve, take it away.
This is Steve Orr. Good afternoon to everyone. It's actually Kelly and Steve, and the reason Kelly and I wanted to do this together is because we have worked on so many nonprofit accounts, as we look at them, that have had significant issues as it relates to board and board management. So I believe we have a very healthy group involved in this call, which we appreciate, and I'm quite sure it's because we are all understanding that this is one of the most vital areas and both problems and opportunities in terms of what both holds us back and gives us the opportunity to move forward with any nonprofit organization. So we know the importance of it, and we've tried to structure a presentation which addresses a lot of the high and low points, and then we'll open it up for questions towards the end. So let me turn it over to Kelly.
Great, thank you. First, we wanted to focus on, get a sense of what's our current situation, and start with a few recent facts about board performance. And this was prepared by Compass Point in their recent study just from last year called Underdeveloped. And so you can see some of the statistics here. That 75% of executive directors call their board member engagement insufficient. And 17% of those executive directors reported that their boards have no involvement in fundraising at all. Only about 48% of development directors at high-performing organizations reported having a lot of influence on board member participation in fundraising. And 25% of organizations have no board fundraising committee or no development committee. So these are some facts to ground us in the situation we're facing as an industry, that given how important boards are to the success of organizations, particularly around fundraising, that there's room for improvement. So we're going to cover a few different areas today. First, we're going to cover elements of an excellent board, some of the key things that it's important to have in place to achieve excellence with your board. Then we'll move on to a few common board issues with recommendations on how to overcome them. And then lastly, we'll actually do 6 changes to make to your board now to start seeing some change. And then we'll, as Steve said, end up with some Q&A. So the first section, elements of an excellent board, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to do the first part of those.
All right, so on this slide you see 7 elements that we believe are critical to defining what has the potential of becoming an excellent board. And there's nothing shockingly new in here, but it's surprising as some of those statistics just showed how few organizations use all of these techniques. So the first one is an active nominating or governance committee. Those names are seemingly interchangeable. Some organizations use nominating, some use governance. It has to do, of course, with the process of identifying and nominating new board members and then conducting business in a way that's got a governance oversight factor to it. Having a job description for a board member is vital. An effective chair. I think we all know that leadership is so vital, not just at the CEO level of a nonprofit, but at the chair level. That can make the difference between, other board members following and being aspirational versus, just sort of muddling along and not actually committing too much. Performance assessments we'll talk a little bit about in terms of how do we judge ourselves as a board, how are we doing. Diversity, we all know, and it's one of our biggest challenges, is we've got to, have our stakeholders represented and have the community at large represented through diversity. And then establish commitment and the 100% fundraising piece. Commitment, I guess we could say, would be both programmatic and fundraising. It is really essential, I think, as we would all like to believe is possible, to have 100% participation in fundraising. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll dig in a little bit on some of these issues. So back to this nominating and governance committee, it should be an ongoing effort. It should be, it's not just, sporadic, let's do it a couple of months, let's stop, let's look at it again next year. It really needs to be ongoing. It needs, the leadership of every organization needs to be committed to this. And, as I say, Kelly and I have done many of these assignments in the last several years, and it just makes a huge difference when the board leadership and the CEO is very much involved. So this committee would be in charge of identifying, cultivating, recruiting, and then orienting new members to the board. It is typical that the board itself would identify the next level of board member, always hopefully trying to find someone in their network who actually is better than they are or has a bigger network than they are, always trying to move the organization ahead and upward. Identify board leadership through a well-considered succession plan. As I say, I think it's really good practice to not only put new people on the board, but to take older, tired board members and retire them. So it's both of those things. So it's a constant series of succession. Let's go to the next. So let's talk then about, get back to the issue of sort of the job description. I don't think any of these things would surprise anyone, but again, it's kind of shocking how organizations haven't always gone through and said, all right, well, exactly what are we asking of our board members? What is the expectation? And then to actually prepare a formal document that addresses all these issues and have the board agree and come to a consensus that, oh yes, we need an individual who's going to advocate for the organization, who is actually going to attend board meetings and other committee activities that they've signed up for, that are going to be directly involved in fundraising, be part of the governance process, have a deep knowledge of the organization. That doesn't always happen overnight, and then have, know how to find and have access to information, and then of course be accountable to all of that. So good to know, that good to present a new board prospect with, well, here's what we're expecting of you. And I think board members expect it and appreciate it when you are organized, any organization is organized to the point where that is the beginning of the conversation. So, okay, the chair piece, leadership is just so critical, I think, as we all know, in the nonprofit field, as with any company, actually. So the board chair needs to do several things. It is, obviously much more effective for the board to be a very good organizer of individuals and inspirational type of person in a group setting. Board meetings can be very exciting and forward-looking if there's someone helping lead it, in addition to the CEO, who is constantly challenging and putting forth new ideas and that kind of thing. So a board chair can just be so effective. So choosing the board chair, of course, to find someone who can handle that is key. The CEO and other members of the management team, there needs to be a good relationship between the CEO and the chair. I mean, it's pretty dysfunctional when the CEO doesn't get along or sees things differently than the chair does. And then you want a board chair, of course, that's very much in touch with, perhaps not, going out and meeting the external stakeholders all the time, but very familiar with who it is that cares about the organization and what is it that we're doing mission-wise that's going to constantly appeal to the external donors, the stakeholders at all levels. The typical skills that we would look for would be, someone who knows how to build strong relationships, They're obviously committed and recognize that the leadership position that we're asking them to take on, or that they have agreed to take on, is really a commitment that this is probably their top charitable focus, and they need to be proactive. They need to be involved. Obviously, they should support the mission and help set the strategies. The one thing I thought about in terms of these points is to say what you don't want a board chair to do is get overly involved. You want the CEO to run the operation. I've seen a lot of organizations where the chair feels it might be a founding chair, for example, or otherwise just a chair who feels it's his or her business to get into staffing issues and all that stuff. I find that very counterproductive. We like to have a chair who's a problem solver, but someone who's looking forward, someone who's got the vision underhand and is able to articulate that to the staff and to the board, but really be a leader. So those are some of the things we would look for in an effective chair. And I'm going to pass it over to Kelly after this one, but performance assessments, there's a lot of work done in this area, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it is important to evaluate the board itself, have the board involved in an evaluation process. I'm going to give you an example. As I was introduced, I not only run OAI, the for-profit consulting practice, but I also, 20 years ago, founded Youth Inc., Improving Nonprofits for Children here in New York City. And I have a board of 37 people. And just this morning, before I came into this meeting, I am in the period now, January, February, of meeting individually, one-on-one, with each and every one of those board members. And I go in with a report card. And I say, here's what you did with us last year, both on the money side and on the programmatic side, or whatever they worked with us on. We try to capture everything. Well, that is a pretty wonderful way of bringing into focus exactly how that individual board member is performing. I highly recommend it. They appreciate it, and it really works. I've been doing it for 20 years, and it works, I promise you. And then the other area would be just for the board itself to enter into any number of processes where maybe before a board retreat or before a board meeting, there's a formal process by which the board recognizes, okay, we're going to be maybe doing a survey or of board members' impressions of how others are doing, try to identify some of the weaknesses involved with the board, and so forth. So I think a constant evaluation of how are we doing as a board, are we doing what we need to do? If we're not, recognizing there's a problem and talking about it and making that a subject of constant discussion. I will pass it to Kelly.
Great. So diversity. Having a board with diverse perspectives is really critically important. Each person will be bringing his or her own personal and professional contacts and life experiences to their service on your board. And with the diversity of experience, expertise, and perspectives, your organization is really going to be in a stronger position to face opportunities and challenges. And there are really sort of 4 areas where we look for diversity. And on the far left, you see sectors, so industry sectors, everything, defense, high tech, legal, healthcare, all the corporate sectors. And then you have government as well, and also education, and then nonprofit too, people who bring that more program experience to bear. And then with different skill sets, these are the kinds of things that you would like experience with to help you with your operations of your nonprofit. So from legal to finance and accounting to branding and marketing and communications to fundraising. And then with demographics, you do want a good mix of different ages, genders, races, and residences. Residences is important if you're a regional or national focused organization. You want a good geographic representation. And then some other factors to think about are other nonprofit board experience. Are they an experienced board member in the nonprofit world? Their personal capacity for giving and fundraising. Do they play well with others? Are they a team player? Any corporate or foundation ties that from their network that you're aware of, and ties to other nonprofits as well. Partnership is becoming more and more important in our world, and so if board members can bring some ties to other organizations that would be a good fit with your organization, that's something to think about as well. So the next slide on commitment, there's a few different areas that we've identified here that would fall under commitment. Your organization should really be one of the top 3 philanthropic causes for each of your board members. Steve mentioned it should be the top one for your board chair, but certainly one of the top 3 for the rest of your board. And they can demonstrate this commitment by through their consistent meeting attendance, regardless of the number of meetings you have every year, if it's 4 or 6 or even monthly in some cases, that they are, they may not be able to make all of them, but consistently enough they are attending those. They're also participating in 1 or more of your board committees. They attend a variety of events that you hold throughout the year, certainly any of your major fundraisers, but if there are other smaller cultivation events or other important events that you hold for your participants, program participants, that they would attend those as well. And that they're willing to make hard decisions and address complex issues in order to really advance the organization. And then lastly, again, we keep harping on this, but that 100% participation in fundraising. And we look at this in 3 different ways, both through their personal giving, by being an advocate, and then participating in the fundraising cycle. By giving generously, it's important to set those give and get expectations. The pros of having that set amount, there's a clear expectation. It can set the bar for new board members, and when you know you have, say, 10 board members who have collectively agreed to contribute $100,000 or whatever that number is, that's an impressive figure to potential funders. Some cons about setting a specific amount, it can be a limiting factor for some people on the board. It could exclude some potentially good board members in other areas who couldn't give that amount. But our recommendation is to set a policy that each board member will consider the organization one of those top 3 philanthropic causes that they give to, and that they will make a personal commitment every year in writing. And we recommend that at the beginning of each fiscal year, you get your board members' pledge in writing for what they will contribute and do from a fundraising perspective. So it's a great opportunity to ask them at one time what they plan to do for the year, so you're not hitting them over and over again. So what's their annual contribution for the annual fund? What will they do for your annual gala? And any other small events or opportunities you might be asking them to give to. And it's also a way to capture how they will commit to supporting your fundraising efforts. Will they serve on your event committee? Will they reach out to 5 new donors for you? Whatever that might be. Getting that in writing is a great way to, as we were talking about earlier, measure against certain expectations. And then in terms of being an advocate, it's important that board members are able to both speak from the heart and speak from the head about your organization. We recommend that a board member is able to tell their own personal story. How did they get involved? Why did they stay committed? And that's really more speaking from the heart. And then it's important that board members know an organization's case for support. This is the speaking from the head portion. So what are the facts and figures that are important to your organization? What are the numbers of people you're trying to serve? What is the need you're meeting in your organization? How is our donations used? How are they put to work? And then how can people give? What are you seeking money for? And then, of course, being prepared with an elevator speech, that 15 to 30-second summary that covers, frankly, all of this, so you can grab people's attention quickly. If you, in all the meetings we've had with the numbers of boards we've worked with over the years, this is one thing over and over again we hear from boards that they want to be given, is an elevator speech. So if you can help give them the basics, they can then craft it in their own words, and they'll be prepared to talk to potential donors, potential board members, whoever it might be. Okay, and then thirdly, in addition to giving and being able to speak effectively about your organization, we would ask them to actually participate in the fundraising cycle. So I'm sure we're all very familiar with the 4 steps of identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And there are really a number of activities they can get involved in each of these areas. We know, we all have them, some board members who just don't like to ask for money. But for those people, there are a number of other ways they can be involved. In terms of identification, they can come up with ideas for people or companies or foundations that we should consider approaching to see if they might be interested in learning more about the organization. Moving into cultivation, they can help just build the relationship. This is the before the ask moment. They can make a call, attend a site visit with a potential donor. Then moving into the solicitation phase, if the board member is comfortable and confident in doing this, if they brought a potential donor to the table, it would be ideal to have that person in the meeting for the ask. And then stewardship. One of the easiest ways and quickest ways to get a board member involved in fundraising is to have them thank your donors. It can be a phone call, it could be a note card in the mail, but it's a great thing to do, it's a fun thing to do, and if we can get them comfortable just talking to donors, we find that there's more likelihood they'll be willing to try other steps in the fundraising process. All right, so we just covered 7 of what we believe are the most important elements to have in place in order to move to an excellent board. We want to move next to a section where we cover 4 common problems that we see in our work with boards. So we will split these up, and I'm going to ask Steve to cover the first 2.
All right, so the first example is a founder's board, and I would guess that everyone understands what we mean by that, but just to be clear, this is where the person who initiated, started the organization, founded it, runs it, and that can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing. So we decided to use a personal experience and example, a case study on this slide of Youth Inc. So yes, I did start it 20 years ago, and I have been the founder and executive director for all that time. So, you know, what you find in these situations, of course, is that to get any nonprofit started, you end up using your personal connections and you know, putting friends on the board, and particularly in the early stages. And it's very, very difficult, I think, as we all know, to move beyond that initial stage, that startup phase. You know, kick off some of the friendships that you have, because you need people that can actually do things like raise money and such. So, you know, some founders are just not willing to do that. I've come into contact with several very wealthy, you know, founder types who do not like to ask, will not ask for money. And so while they have built a board of personal relationships, they've done it on the basis that you don't have to give any money, we just want your prowess, expertise, and so forth. Now that can be paralyzing for the organization, because the founder at some moment is going to either get bored, move on, not be the chief funder, and it's not healthy, of course, if you want to expand the organization, if it's on a growth track, you know, to overly rely upon that founder. So, you know, the reason I think it does work in Youth Inc.'s case, but I am ready at any time. I always tell the board, I'm the one talking to the board about, do you want to have a succession plan? Would you like to make a change? Would you like to start, you know, bringing someone along who can take over from me? And because I think they're happy with the way I'm managing it, they're not that excited about it, but I'm going to force the issue, because I'm, you know, I think it's a good thing to do. But I think the things that I've done right are that the board recruitment is a top priority at all time. It has been for 20 years. So for example, in 2013, with a 37-person board, we retired 6 board members, and we added another 6. And we upgraded. So we took the folks, you know, who weren't really performing, had either lost interest, who lost their job, incapable, whatever, and just said, you know, we want you to be involved, but this second to last point, we created something called a sustaining board, which is really an idea which has worked very, very well. These are good people. They just can't do what we originally asked them to do, yet they still have the passion around Youth Inc.'s mission. So we give them a single purpose role, and that means it's that sustaining board. So they don't have I mean, the give and get is much smaller, the, you know, financial requirement is much smaller, but it really has worked. So I highly recommend that. The last thing I'll mention is that I think it was really key that starting 2 years ago, we put what turned out to be a very comprehensive strategic planning process together. It didn't start out that way. It was started out as a two-meeting kind of operation, but the key board members really got into it, and they owned it. These are major people like the CEO of Bloomberg and some major individuals who really wanted to chart the path for the next 5 years for Youth Inc. And that was really transformational. And that took it. I'm proud. If I can say one thing about Youth Inc. as being a founder, I would say that I try not to make it all about me. I try to make it about all of the board members, and that has really worked. So let's go to the next one. The second type of example would be one where a board is in transition. Now, Kelly and I worked together on this particular assignment. We felt it wouldn't be PC to talk about, to provide the name of the organization, but it is a real New York City 30-year-old organization that provides incredibly valuable services for challenged children. It's about a $20 million organization. They came to us and said, we've got all these issues that Kelly and I have been addressing. We've got an entrenched board. We have a founder problem. We have people have been generous, but it's not growing. In fact, it's shrinking. So they engaged us at what turned out to be about a year-long operation, and they did not have things like a give and get. Their board membership did include several people who were not performing, and yet they never asked anyone to leave because they were friends. They did not look at themselves strategically and say, gosh, we're in New York City, we should have a good array of finance people, media people, all the things that Kelly just went through in terms of the different industry representations and the different skill sets. They didn't look at any of it strategically. So let's look at the next page. Here's what we did. And sort of what happened over this period of time. We went to, out of the 20-person board meeting, we identified about what turned out to be about 9, I think, is that right? Yeah, individuals who we wanted, number one, to be on this board long term because they were able to give, they were giving, they were interested, and specifically because they had network and they were connected. So we carved out the special committee. And for the first time, we established a minimum give and get at $25,000, which is considered to be pretty significant number for the board. Now, these 9 individuals that we chose were already giving at those levels, but the rest were definitely not. So we, followed our advice and put together a job description. And then the board chair in this case was the one who hired us, and he was incredibly involved and one of the real change agents that sort of forced the process. And so as the result was, we recruited 9 new board members, and so you can do the math, 9 new board members at $25,000 each over a 12-month period, and each one of those folks have been tremendously committed, to the whole operation. And it was just a terrific exercise to change the culture for this organization. And so we would say a board of transition is probably every board that we are talking about. This was a unique case. It was prime for change, and we just ended up having a great experience because of the leadership, all the things we've been talking about. Kelly?
Okay, great. The next board issue we want to talk about is the board recruited without performance expectations or a job description. So some of the potential issues we've referenced earlier, if you don't put a job description in front of new board members when you're recruiting them, you haven't established a giving or a fundraising expectation or requirement. It makes it really difficult to measure your board members against responsibilities if they didn't sign up for something specific in the first place. And you have just a greater likelihood of having some non-performing board members since those expectations were not provided in writing. So some of our recommendations on if you don't have a job description, or maybe it's a stale job description or hasn't been used in a while, to work with the governance or nominating committee to craft and adopt a job description using industry best practices as well as any customization for your organization. Have board members sign an annual contract or some kind of document where they're actually in writing committing to the time and financial and fundraising expectations. And this is something you should do either every year or every term if you have term limits or term periods of time. Also, this allows you, by having this job description, it helps you conduct those assessments of board members because you have this list of expectations that they have agreed to. And have those honest conversations with any members who consistently don't meet their commitments. A lot of times they're waiting for you to have this conversation with them, and they welcome it when you reach out to them. And they may have something going on in their life that you don't know about, and they're just not able to commit in the way they originally were or would like to. So don't shy away from these honest conversations. And this is something, those kinds of meetings are where you should involve the CEO, the executive director should be involved, as well as the board chair in some cases. So, and then, so the fourth example is an unengaged board with perhaps a few exceptions. Some of the potential issues around an unengaged board is if you do have a few members, though, who are engaged, by being the ones who are most engaged with their time, if they're making a few large donations, they could really control the agenda and the strategy for the organization. If they're the only ones showing up for those board meetings, you're losing that diversity of perspectives and opinions. And so you risk losing the voices of your members from other industries, skill sets, demographics, whatever it might be. So some of the recommendations, if this is something that you face, consider term limits if you don't already have them in place, or a length of a term period. Some people are serving in perpetuity, but I think a lot of people welcome knowing that they have a 2-year term on the board and that it can be renewed once, twice, 3 times, whatever it might be, but that there's that limit and expectation. And this helps with turnover and changing of the guard and bringing in new perspectives and opinions. Again, conduct that board assessment of both the board as a whole and individual members. So if you can do a full board assessment through survey, this is an opportunity for board members to really voice their opinions about what the situation is in a more comfortable, more private way. And so then take the results of this assessment and really use it to make changes. What is the assessment saying needs to be changed? Now you have a tool to go to the board and say, we all agree this is a problem, let's address it. And again, have those honest conversations with members who are disengaged. Are they feeling overpowered by certain board members, or are they truly just not able to commit in the way they originally intended? And then this is a great opportunity to launch a robust board recruitment effort, inject some new blood into the organization so the the agenda is spread amongst more people instead of those few more major donors and contributors. Okay, so we move into our third section, which is 6 changes to make to your board now. These are 6 critical steps you can start doing immediately to improve your board and overcome some of the issues you might be facing. So let's start with number 1. Again, create that board job description and require each board member to sign it annually or at the beginning of their term. And then number 2, retire non-performing board members. So if you have your job description, you've done the assessment, you are ready to have conversations with board members who just aren't performing. Make sure you're requiring 100% of your board members to participate in fundraising. And this isn't only a nice thing to have, but it's becoming more and more important when especially when you're applying to certain foundations and corporate funders. They want to see that 100% of your board is giving, and they're also asking how many are actually involved in fundraising as well. So I'll turn it over to Steve to round up the list.
The fourth point is to make sure that the CEO/executive director is spending at least 30% of their time with the board. I recently gave gave a speech or whatever in front of 100 people, and I asked by show of hands, how many CEOs did this and what percentage of the time, and the answer was on average about 10% of the time, which I thought was shockingly low. So when you look at point number 2, they're retiring non-performing board members, that obviously can be a very sensitive, very difficult task. But if the CEO is intimately involved with the board, really has been involved with the recruitment of them, has been monitoring their actions, has been regularly reviewing the pros and cons of what they've been doing, that's going to be a way to make change happen. And this slide, the board responsibility of the CEO, train your board on how to fundraise, that's critical, provide administrative support to the board. You can't expect the board as a series of volunteers to do more than what you really want them to do is identify who they know in their networks for fundraising purposes, and then you as a staff should be providing things like marketing materials, support documents, etc. You want them to make the call. Once the letter is in front of the donor, you want them to make that call and close the deal. And then throughout the year, meet each board member to ensure their needs. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but there's got to be a goal. There's got to be done an evaluation on how the board member did against those. Point number 5, identify your board needs and begin to recruit new board members to fill the gaps. That was what Kelly had gone through, and we can look at on this next slide. Identify the needs at the top of that slide. Identify the needs for the next several years using a profile of your current board. This is where you want to look and say, gosh, we're all one industry, or we're all not from corporations. We are too narrow. We're not diverse, and so the first place to start is like, what are we missing? Then it would be going to the right. Determine what's the flow. If we have term limits, there's going to be renewals or retirements. That's the great thing about term limits, is it gives you the opportunity to retire someone comfortably. The other part of that would be, if you have a sustaining board or you have some other board that you can put people who aren't performing fully, that's a really clever way to do it as well. Interview candidates using a job description, and I like the word interview because when you go and speak with someone who's been introduced to you as a CEO or as a nominating committee member, you really want to talk to the person about what their interest is, and here's the job description. Is that something you could do? Is that something you're interested in doing? Would you make this one of your top 3 philanthropic activities? So open, honest discussion is absolutely the way to go. And then what's expected of them be fundraising would be what they're thinking. And if you don't respond to that proactively, you're going to lose momentum with that person. And then approve the slate, bring them in. And then let's not forget to orient new board members. You think we, 2 years ago, instituted a very comprehensive orientation process. And it's amazing the impact that has had on people, on the new board members' ability and willingness to really get entrenched earlier, much earlier in the cycle of their board service. So that would be the recruitment process that we would talk about. The last point is consider working with outside counsel for an objective voice to help steer the board towards the needed transition. Now this, you might say, okay, it's a little self-serving, but when we go back to the example in the number 2 case of the board in transition, it would have been very difficult, almost impossible for that process to take place without an outside entity. In this case, it was OAI that really drove the process. Because all the things we're saying here is not anything probably anyone would find brilliant or new, but actually getting it done and actually convincing the board and the leadership to actually implement, to actually boot off some of the board members that are not performing, to actually go out and spend serious time recruiting. It just doesn't happen naturally, which is why there's still so many people on this call, I would maintain. Okay, so those are our 6 things, and then you're going to see a boom page here, just reminding everyone that it does take time. This is not a process that is done overnight. I think it's a process that you never stop managing. It's an ongoing effort, and it really literally can take months and years, but it will be the defining characteristic of moving forward or not moving forward. So whenever Kelly and I are asked by a new client prospect, do we want to work with them on a fundraising activity, let's say, the first thing we go to is, well, where are you on all these issues related to your board? Are they involved? Are they giving? Are they willing? And so forth. And if the answer is no, oh my gosh, we've got big problems there, we'll back up and say, well, we could work with you on that, but you need to address those issues first. So that is the way we look at it. So with that, we can now open it up to Q&A. and we'd be happy to go deeper on any of these topics.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve and Kelly. We have some great questions, and they're still coming in. We had a lot of questions asking for some more particulars about the board job description, if there are some broad qualities that they can look for, or what kind of things that should contain.
Sure. My experience is that there are about probably 7 to 10 key things you want to cover, but you also don't want to make it so overwhelming to a board prospect. So actually on slide 6, there are, we've listed out I think about 7 types of things that you should cover in your job description. But then within each of these areas you can get really specific. So for example, the give and get requirement, if you have that specific dollar amount of what they're asked to give and get every year, put that right out in the job description. And any other fundraising expectations. Are they to attend the gala? Are they to serve on the event committee? Whatever that might be. Meeting expectations. However many meetings you have per year, how many are they expected to attend, either in person or over the phone? Committee requirements. Are they asked to join one or more committees? And so state that clearly. An expectation that they will be well informed about the organization. They will make financial decisions for the organization. There's really a number of some key things, and there's lots of best practices that you can find on some resources online. BoardSource is an excellent resource for finding sample job descriptions. We craft these all the time for our clients as well.
I think this goes right to the heart of transparency. I am quite sure, having done this for a long time now, that a prospective board member wants to know specifically what it is that you're asking of them, and they want to know that up front. And in most situations, you find, the recruitment process ends up in a dialogue which is fairly informal, and gosh, we're doing wonderful work. Wouldn't you love to be part of what we're doing? And that's not going to do it. It's very unfulfilling for the prospect, and it's not going to help you if that person says, sure, I'd love to join, and then 2 months later you say, by the way, you need to raise this much money, you need to give this much money, and they say, well, wait a minute, we never talked about that. So job description goes to the heart of transparency.
Excellent. And around a similar vein, when talking about the board report card, are a lot of those same items things that were originally in the job description and it's used as a check-in point, or are those different items?
That's a great question, whoever asked that. The way I like to use this is I like to sit down with a board member, as I indicated, in the beginning of the year, and if they're new, let's say, and I can't present a report card, I would go through the committee structure with them, saying that, well, there are any number of ways you can get involved, and here are the committees. What are your natural strengths? What would you like to try to accomplish this year? So, and we would set goals specifically of how much money they might want to try to help raise, what kind of programmatic issues they want to move forward through our process. And then that will set me up for a dialogue the following year of actually coming in with a report card which very specifically indicates, what have you done with us over the course of that year. At YouThank, our board members, we don't have term limits, and I did that intentionally because I like to aggressively, I spend probably 60% of my time with board members, and about 95% of the funding comes through our board members. And I like to stay very current with them and keep them very engaged. So I don't want term limits because I want to kick them off if they're incapable, and at the same time I want to keep them on specifically. And we have board members who've been on for over 10 years and they are still as active today as they were ever. But it's not for lack of management. It's because I do sit down with them every year and say, here's what you did. We need to be more aspirational, or, gosh, you did a great job. Thank you very much. Let's do the same.
Excellent. Switching gears a little bit, we had a lot of questions asking about the recruitment process. Maybe we can start broad. Are there any good recruitment process resources that people can use to start?
Sure. Oftentimes we recommend starting with your current board and doing a peer review session where it could start just with your nominating committee, or you could broaden it to your entire board, where you ask board members to provide maybe 3 to 5 suggestions of board members. You could also, your development team could also do some homework on potential board members, and then you could share that list within this peer review session to see who knows whom. And then, and that's really just the first step, is just getting a list of suspects together and seeing where the connections are. And then from there, I would think about board recruitment the same way you would think about major donor cultivation. This could take several steps of meeting with a potential board candidate, because you want to, as Steve was saying, you want to be very clear with them about what you're asking them to do, but you also want to get a feel for each other. Is this a right fit culturally? Are they really filling a gap that you have on your current board? Are they ready and willing for this level of commitment that you're asking them? The first meeting could be with a board member, one of your current board members that they know, along with the executive director, or it could just be that board member. And the next meeting could be then a meeting with the executive director, followed by a site visit at your organization. And then you could offer up the opportunity to speak with other board members so they really get a sense of what it's like to serve on your board. This really could take place over a number of months. Steve, did you want to jump in?
There is a concept which most of you are probably familiar with called moves management, and that's a topic you can Google, and there's a lot of material written on it. And as Kelly just mentioned, that if you're running a major gift program, that's really what moves management was designed around initially, but it's equally applicable for campaign management and for board recruitment. It's really a series of moves, tracking a series of moves with an individual as to how you are communicating with them, how you are moving them through a process to an end, to the end, and whatever the goal is. A big gift, a board commitment, whatever. So it's typical, for example, Kelly, when we take on one of these assignments, you know, we'll go out and meet with, we'll ask each board member, let's use the example that we talked about, the 9 committee members. You know, we ask for each of them to identify 3 to 5 people in their network, and we would talk to them and communicate with them and sit down with them, hopefully, ultimately. And certainly not all of them became board members. However, we identified a number of those that became major gift officers. So
major gift donors.
I'm sorry, major gift donors. And then there was a gala that happened through that process, and the outcome of the gala was significantly higher, and I think it was because we were teeing up a conversation with so many new individuals and corporations. So moves management is something, it's just a process and something that research and really get into that, and you'll see that it's a compilation of data that's very, very useful if you track it.
Great. In talking about that recruitment process, Kelly, you had mentioned site visits and meeting with different board members. Are there any marketing materials or anything that the staff level would help prepare in that process?
Yes, absolutely. You'll want to use your, your packet, your organization's packet. So your fact sheet, or if you have a case statement, anything that highlights your programs and the impact you're having and outcomes. That's a key piece of materials that you'll want to be able to either walk through or leave behind in any of these initial meetings. It's also important for whoever's going on that initial meeting, if the prospect is not already well known to them, but also even if they are, to have done a donor profile. You can use a lot of online resources to gather information such as their professional biography, their family information, what their spouse is involved in, what their profession is, any other boards they're involved in, what their giving has been like to other organizations, because that'll give you a sense of what their capacity for giving is when you see what the highest giving has been to other groups. So you'll want to prepare that for anybody who's going on that meeting, so they just have that background and can pick out certain things from the bio to maybe talk about with that potential prospect.
Excellent. And for the smaller organizations, and especially those just getting started, so if they do not have an active board to help with that initial process of creating names that could potentially be on the board, is that when they would want to use a consultant? And if so, how do you choose the right consultant for your organization?
Yeah, we get questions all the time, from startups. And having started up a charity, I can tell you, I can relate to it. So yes, I get calls every day saying, gosh, would OAI, be able to help this organization get started, establish a 501c3, establish a board, establish a fundraising base? And the answer is it almost never works properly because it costs money to hire consultants. And there is a false expectation out there, I think, that let's hire this person because of their background, because who we think they know, and they're going to bring these people to our organization to help build the board. We never sell ourselves that way, and I think any consultant who does is making a big mistake. And for a startup that has very precious and limited resources, it's a very tough challenge. So there obviously can be a number of roles that an outside consultant practice can play in setting up a new charity, particularly if there's funding available, and that would be things like best practices, the governance elements, setting up the right kind of board, the right kind of governance process, the right kind of nominating procedures. Those would be things, more of counsel things that could be really good. You also, OAI has a fully outsourced fundraising capability as well, so you can do that, but it costs money, and we as the outsourced development folks need a board to work with to collect those network major gift or individuals or gala kinds of supporters.
And I will add that if you're trying to find just new names and you don't have those existing connections or networks, you may want to try looking to some civic organizations or corporate membership organizations like a chamber or a board of trade or something like that, where they have a membership based in the corporate sector, and those are people who are usually looking for some kind of philanthropic opportunity. And sometimes those organizations have a program, a board matching program. So that might be a place to look as well.
Excellent, great tips. Also, in your experience, is there an ideal size for a board depending on the size of an organization?
That is a fascinating topic, and I would say there is no magic formula there. I've given you examples of boards that are very large, 37 to 40. I've worked with the United States ski team for a long time. They have a 60-person board, and then they have a second board that's almost 60 people as well. And then, I would say the average organization, not necessarily a smaller nonprofit, but the average organization is going to have a board of maybe 10 to 20 in that range. But there is no magic there. What you want, you have to have people who are highly networked, and you have to have folks who are willing to use those networks and willing to lead the organization. If you can do that with a small number of bodies, that's okay. And by the way, just the board of directors is only one of the groups that you might want to put together to assist. The committee structure does not need to be all board members. They can be committee members who are non-board members, and that will lengthen out the network and provide an opportunity to work with someone before they become a board member. So those would be some of my observations. Anything else?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Great. Switching gears just a little bit, in the case of an underperforming board member, who should be the one to have that initial conversation to maybe discuss them stepping down?
I'll take that because I do it all the time. I'm a very aggressively involved CEO of this organization I've been talking about, so I will normally do it because chances are I recruited the person. Chances are, well, for sure, I've been evaluating their performance over time, and it won't really come as a surprise to the person when I say, gosh, Joe, the things we talked about a year ago, you weren't able to perform. I understand there's been changes in your job, in your life, whatever. Maybe it's time to step aside until you're ready to take on these tasks. So in my case, that would be an example of where the CEO does it. There are a number of organizations that uses the nominating committee and or the board chair to perform that function, and that's a good thing too. We talked about the leadership that makes an excellent board chair. it would be someone, who's very involved with the board, understands what the expectations are, and understands what is and is not happening. That person might be the ideal person to have that conversation. It is sometimes not a comfortable conversation, but and I think that's the problem, is that most organizations are not willing to have the conversation. But that's why we are recommending, a regular evaluation process, because then it's just like a personnel review. It's not going to come as a surprise if you've heard this about yourself as a board member, that my expectations were not met, so guess what? There are consequences.
Yep.
Definitely. It looks like we have time for one more question, and we're going to end it on a more positive note. Can you offer any tips to thank, recognize, or reward hardworking board members?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, I'll throw something out.
Yes, I have it.
We 2 years ago we have tried with organizations to do some extraordinary fundraising, large amounts, and obviously that only pertains to a small number of people. So we came up with a chair circle idea, and then which was a very large number individually they gave, and we did a special dinner for them at a very unique spot. It turned out one of our board members paid for it, and it was only 8 people, and it was very special, and it was really appreciated, and it engendered a huge amount of goodwill, and also I hope set us up for enjoying that level of donation over time.
I would say if there's a way to tie any kind of acknowledgement or thank you back to your mission as well. So if you're working with a population of kids or adults or whatever it might be, if they got together somehow and created some kind of thank you for your board, I think that would be really impactful as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Well,
thank you.
Actually, one more idea there. Kelly talked earlier about having actually board members call. That is a brilliant suggestion. We probably all do galas in our organizations, and everyone knows that when you sell a table of 10, there's only one person putting money against that, and you've got 9 other guests who haven't really been exposed to the organization except for that one gala intercept. What a great way to, like, right after the gala, to have a board member contact an individual and just say, I'm not asking anything of you, I just want to tell you a lot more about what we do, and thank you for coming to the event. You'd be amazed how many new donors, new board members, et cetera, come from that type of intersect.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for those great answers to the questions, and thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. For all of you on the phone, thanks so much for being with us. Our next webinar is next Tuesday, January 14th at 1 p.m., and the topic is Leveraging Social Media for Nonprofit Events. For more information, please visit guidestar.org/webinars. Again, if we didn't get to your question, please check our blog at trust.guidestar.org for additional answers, and watch out for the email coming soon with the presentation and the recording. Thanks to Steve and Kelly again, and everyone on the phone. Have a wonderful day.